those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. George Santayana. We are in a fourth turning. What does that mean? The whole world is dealing with a crisis. But are these statements from today or about a century ago? World War I ends. Spanish flu sweeps the world, throwing it into a devastating economic depression. So is it possible that history works in cycles, whether we remember it or not? Everything we know in life works in cycles. The four seasons of spring, summer, fall, and winter each have their specific function in nature. The night and day each follows the other. The generations in the family change periodically. And this cyclical connectivity of the world seems to affect the social, political, and economic environments of society as well. Especially in the U.S., these patterns are easy to see in politics. Almost every decade, the presidents and the political bent seem to be shifting from one end of the spectrum to the other. Many philosophers and historians have written books about such recurring patterns. Among these theories is one of the four patterns in society. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. As per Strauss-Howe generational theory, this pattern can be observed throughout recent history, and the whole circle seems to last for around 80 years to a century. These authors observe that each of these cycles can be divided into four periods: high, awakening, unraveling, and crisis. And when you see the recent American history, ever since its independence, it could be divided into around 80 to 100 year cycles of crisis and all the changes that happen in between. The first era can be seen between the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, the second from the Civil War to World War II, and the third and current era started after World War II and is now in its final stage. If we look at the current cycle of events that started with the end of World War II, the four sections of seasons of change, if you will, are quite apparent. Soon after the end of the last monumental era-ending crisis, the world, and the U.S. in particular, saw a high. The 2 decades that followed led to unprecedented economic growth and industrial prowess. In recent centuries, that period might be the most affordable era, and a time that saw a massive expansion of the middle class all over. All in all, it was a period of tremendous high. Although economic growth was ample, social justice took a back seat during this time. Many were doing better than ever, but some communities were left behind. This led to a period of awakening. The decades of the 60s and 70s saw a seismic change never experienced by society. Racial integration, women's rights, legendary music, and counterculture are the terms associated with those times. But the calendar flipped and the 80s arrived, and the U.S. once again changed generations and saw a shift. The era of unraveling saw a polar shift in politics. War on drugs, the Gulf War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the collapse of the Soviet Union are the biggest events of this era. This era of unraveling was one of political chaos and the rise of globalization that saw the economic divide like never before. While the rich were getting richer, the poor were more disenfranchised than ever. All of this culminated when the housing bubble popped in 2008. And this was the start of our current crisis, which is only amplified by the pandemic of the last year. While all of this news of pandemic, job loss, and the divided political situation might seem gloomy, the good news is that as with each season, this too shall pass. The important thing is what we do when this passes. Each generation present today represents an era in the past cycle of events. People born during the last unraveling, or the Gen Xers, can guide the future with the lessons of change and culture. The people who grew into the last unraveling, or the millennials, will hold the positions of power as the current crisis will end, and they hold the responsibility of bringing the new high. Today, they are shaping the economy of today and what the new progress will look like. The Gen Z that are born during the present crisis will forge the change our society craves. Hopefully, our society will never see any person being discriminated against when the next awakening comes. But there might be more unraveling and global crises in the future. This might be inevitable, but how we deal with them is not. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. The hard times of today will make strong people that bring in great times, and it might be their predisposition to produce weak people. But how we deal with the hard times is up to the generations dealing with the current era. The quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," is not necessarily a prophecy, but it certainly holds some merit, and the events to be witnessed in the future era can depend on how well we remember our past.
Congrats, you watched the whole video. Looks like this video is your cup of tea, then consider watching another video. Give a like to the video, comment your thoughts down and share to spread the word. Please subscribe to the channel to support and watch more videos. Keep inspiring.